Hi everyone, welcome to Big Cypress National Preserve. I'm Ranger Conrad, and I am a park ranger here, and it's my job to help protect this awesome place that we call the Big Cypress Swamp. Now, one of the most important things that we protect here at Big Cypress is the water. This water plays a very important role here in the preserve. It nourishes all of the habitats that you can find throughout the area where we can find our amazing plants and animals. As it moves down towards the Gulf of Mexico, it gets cleaned and filtered, and we can get our drinking water from underneath the ground after it's been properly cleaned. And then when it finally reaches the Gulf of Mexico, that clean water mixes in with the Gulf, and it provides amazing, clean, brackish water for a lot of marine species. What's that? How big is the preserve? Well, the preserve is massive. It's over 500,000 football fields in size. What? You're asking about the water? How long does it take the water to move through the swamp? Well, that's a very good question. Let's find out. In order to answer our question of how long does it take water to move through the Big Cypress Swamp, we first have to learn where this water comes from and how is it moving through the swamp. Now, all of this water comes from the rain. A lot of people think that this water comes from Lake Okeechobee, but Lake Okeechobee actually feeds our neighbor to the east, Everglades National Park. All of this water is a rain-fed watershed, meaning that this water will come down from the sky just to the north of us, south of Caloosahatchee River, and it will flow through this entire region, including Big Cypress National Preserve, and it will be filtered and cleaned as it moves through the swamps and through the prairies, and eventually it will reach the 10,000 islands and the Gulf of Mexico. Water is constantly moving throughout the entire watershed here at Big Cypress National Preserve, and it can move in two different ways. It can move above ground through either the swamp itself, through rivers, or it can also move through man-made canals. But that water can also move underneath the ground. This is what we call groundwater. Now the question is this water flowing faster above the ground, or will it flow faster underneath the ground? If you said above ground, you would be correct. Water above the ground will have fewer obstacles as it flows through the swamp. But keep in mind, stuff like trees, roots, and vegetation can slow down that water as it moves down to the 10,000 islands in the Gulf of Mexico. What are some things that could affect the flow of water here in this cypress swamp? There are actually lots of things around me that can affect the flow. All of these cypress trees can either absorb the water or just stop or slow the flow as water hits and moves around the trees. The underground, the roots, the vegetation that grows underneath the water, they can also slow the flow and absorb some of that water. And the height of the water can also determine how fast or how slow that water is moving. So it's kind of dry out here right now. Where do we think the water is flowing out in the prairie in the dry season? Well, if you said the plants are taking up some of that water, you would be correct. Just like in the cypress domes, the plants out in the prairie, all the grasses and the dwarf cypress trees are soaking up the water through their roots, so that water is going up into the plants. The water is also going down. So the water, instead of moving on the surface like it would through the cypress swamps, it's going to be going down in what we call infiltration as it goes down into the bedrock, which is all this limestone rock underneath our feet. And it goes down into a large container of water under the ground, which we call an aquifer. So the water is both moving up in the plants and moving down into the aquifer. The weather and the climate of the region play a big influence on the flow of water. There are two seasons here in South Florida, the dry season and the wet season. Now the question is, when does the water flow faster in the Big Cypress Swamp? During the dry or wet season? If you said the wet season, you're gonna be correct. 3/4 of the water that comes into the swamp comes through rainfall during the wet season. This is when the water will be flowing a lot faster through the preserve because there's so much more water. Now that doesn't mean that we still don't get other rains during the dry season. November has some pretty strong storms, but most of that rain is falling down hard in the wet season, and all this water accumulates up into the swamp. You'll see the water level come up nice and high, and all that water can flow a lot faster down towards the Gulf of Mexico. So we know how the water flows through the swamp, but it's also important to know why it flows through Big Cypress National Preserve. Water is the lifeblood of the swamp. Every living thing inside the Big Cypress watershed depends on its clean water. Take a listen around in this Big Cypress swamp. What can you hear? You can hear animal noises off in the distance. You can hear different kinds of birds chirping up above in the trees. Those are frogs. I heard both a pig frog and a southern leopard frog. Why would a frog need clean water? One of the big reasons why frogs like clean water is because they need a safe place to lay their eggs so that their baby tadpoles can grow up big and strong, and clean water plays a very important role in that. The mangrove estuary lies at the base of the watershed, and it relies on a clean input of fresh water from the Big Cypress Swamp. Now, this fresh water will mix with the salt water of the Gulf of Mexico, and this creates what we call brackish water, a mixture of fresh and salt water. Now, these mangrove estuaries are very important habitat for a lot of marine animals. But the question is, what types of marine animals are using the mangrove estuaries, and why? The answer is that the mangrove estuaries act like a nursery for the young, the juveniles of many marine species. Lots of marine fish will come into the estuaries, and when they're small, they will grow up amongst the roots of the mangrove trees, which provide shelter. You'll also find other smaller predatory species that will also be juveniles, like our bull sharks, which can actually come up into the fresh water, and when they're babies, they will hang out in the mangrove estuaries where it's a lot safer for them to grow up. The plants and the animals aren't the only ones that rely on the clean water from Big Cypress National Preserve. We also need that clean water. But the question is, where are we getting the water from the swamp? Are we pumping it from the surface, or are we getting it from underneath the ground? If you said from underground, you would be correct. We get our water from the aquifer. So if you remember from earlier, the aquifer is a big container underneath the ground in all that bedrock, which we call limestone. It stores all the water that filters down through the prairies and the cypress swamps, and it eventually goes into that container. And that's where we can pump out our clean water, which we can then filter a little bit more, and we can use that as drinking water, as water for our sinks, our showers, our pools. You name it, all of our water comes from the aquifer underneath Big Cypress National Preserve. So if we protect the watershed, we protect the aquifer, and we protect our clean water. We have learned so much about the water in Big Cypress National Preserve. But now we come back to the question that we asked at the very beginning. How long does it take water to flow through the swamp? Well, the neat part is, we don't just have one answer. There are so many factors that can influence the flow of water. If we're in the dry season in the prairie, all that water is under the ground going down to the aquifer and not flowing through the swamp to the Gulf of Mexico. If we're in the wet season inside the cypress swamp, that water will be above the ground and flowing, but the trees might be slowing that flow and absorbing some of that water, so it may not even reach the end of the swamp. So it could take months, it could take years, or that water may not even reach the very end. But it's not about how long the water takes to reach the end of the swamp, but more about the journey, the lives of the plants, the animals, even us. This water plays a huge role in the entire ecosystem of South Florida, and it's why the National Park Service protects Big Cypress National Preserve, so that we can have clean water for many years to come.